This is the Fearless Experience with Brendan P. Keegan. Conversations with leaders who provide valuable, candid insights from their journeys and share their secrets to what made them successful and fearless.
Today's fearless leader is Henrik Werdelin, the legendary co-founder of Bark. And you might know it from Bark Box. Well, Henrik is also a founder, he's an investor, he's an author, he's a serial entrepreneur, he's a coach, he's done a lot of things, and we're gonna get into that today. He's currently, though, building a new AI platform, and just coming out now, he's got a great book, and I love the title of it, Me, My Customer, and AI. So, Henrik, welcome to the Fearless Experience.
Thank you so much for having me. And for the very kind introduction. I mean, like, I should go on podcast all the time to get my vanity dialed up a little bit.
Well, if you want, I can just follow you around and do the intro.
I'll take that.
I'll just do that for you.
I will take that.
I'll tell you where I'd like to start. I think you've had a really interesting, compelling entrepreneurial journey that a lot of people can learn from, would like to know how you got to where you are. You're in Copenhagen, but how you got to be as successful. So let me just start. You help companies kind of at all stages. You help them from generating an idea right on your website. By the way, you can generate an idea with your AI GPT right there. All the way through acquisition when someone's built a successful business. So can you just tell us what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from going from kind of cradle to grave, start to finish, idea to exit?
I guess one of the things that you learn when you start to know a lot about a specific domain is how little you know about it. And so I think maybe the thing that I get most blown away is that we talk about entrepreneurship like there's one way to do it. And the reality is that there are so many different, but we don't even have, I mean, we talked about Denmark. Apparently people from Greenland, they have something like 35 different names for snow, right? Just because obviously like they're so used to that. And so they have a very large vocabulary around it. I think for entrepreneurship, we don't have that much of a vocabulary. We kind of assume that entrepreneurship is entrepreneurship. And in fact, I believe there's different pedagogy of entrepreneurship, and obviously there's different flavors of it. Some companies becomes big and go public, and some of them just, stays as mom and pop stores. And I think that we have a little bit forgotten in our kind of fascination about unicorns to have a good conversation about all these different types of companies.
So when you go about working with a company from an idea, like how do you know what problem to solve? Because ultimately, a new company is trying to solve a problem that's maybe already solved, but they're doing it more efficiently or differently or better, or they've identified a problem before people know it's a problem. So how do you go about identifying, what the entrepreneur, what the company is going to be focused on?
Well, I think you point to something that's super important. And most people, they think that starting companies is about coming up with an idea. I think where I start is who is somebody you'd like to serve. And then I think the second part, as you identify, is like, what is a problem? I think if you only have an idea and it doesn't work, and often, as we know, ideas don't really pan out, you're kind of like done. But if you're trying to solve a meaningful problem, then an idea is just kind of an attempt. It's just something that you could pivot around. And so my pedagogy of entrepreneurship is very anchored in who can you be bothered talking to for the next 10 years? Where do you have something that compel you to be of service? And then second, how do you find a problem? And the simplest way I do it, I even have it on my Post-it notes. I use the sentence, it sucks that. And I basically think if you cannot articulate your problem as it sucks that statement, then you probably don't have something that's meaningful enough for you to solve.
No, I mean, I have not seen someone with a notepad like that. So that is first.
I'm obsessed about this thing now. I mean, like I think when you talk to people, like I sit a lot of time in an airplane because I kind of work in New York, but I live in Copenhagen, and you ask people, like, do you have a good business idea? And everybody will climb out immediately. But if you ask them, hey, tell me about what you do, and then what's the big problem you guys are trying to solve? Like, then people will like literally talk to you for hours, right? And I remember, for example, one of the first time that I really kind of like this struck me, I was flying Copenhagen to to New York, and I was sitting next to somebody from the shipping company Maersk. And I asked the question. He said, we're shipping $1 billion worth of empty containers from the US back to China every year. I was like, that's an interesting problem, right? And meanwhile, I had literally, as an investor, been pitched like 5 ideas of another kind of food sharing, picture sharing app that the world didn't need. And so this thing about really angering on what is the problem that you would like to solve is something that I think is super important.
Now, it's something you said, at the last company that I led, we had some really tremendous growth. It was a 56-year-old company, 500 million. So a good sized company. And 4.5 years later, we sold it at 2.7 billion. And I get asked, what was the transformational moment? And I talk about when we realized what the company really was. And I was fortunate. I had been their biggest customer. I had been a board member. So I knew the company, and they viewed themselves as leasing cars. If you would ask people, what do you do? They'd say, lease cars. And I used to go, no, we don't. We move things. We help people move things. It could be people. It could be buses. It could be boxes and tractor trailers or vans. But if we look at ourselves as a car leasing company, we're always going to be limited to cars and leasing. And we literally just changed our vision statement and really focused on we help people move things, people, services freely. And it completely unlocked new markets for us and new products. But it was interesting because I'm like, we lease cars. Like, what problem does that solve? It's not solving a problem. It's actually driving what you do.
I think that is like such an important point. And I think it is sort of obvious and nobody does it. Like, everybody defines themselves of what they do, not what problem they're solving or who they would like to be. And we had the same thing with Bark. I mean, like, everybody, we're talking about what is your next product. And because we were known for sending stuff in a box to dogs, and everybody goes like, when are you launching cat box? And my co-founders and I was looking at each other like, we'll never ever launch a cat box. And go like, why wouldn't you? Because like, we don't see ourselves as somebody who ships stuff in boxes. We see ourselves as somebody who makes dogs and the people who love them happy. And that's what we do. And so our next big product was an airline for dogs, because that was the next big problem that we wanted to solve. And I think if you look at a lot of the success of the companies that I've been involved in, from Bark to Row to Managed by Q, they have always had the same kind of element. That is, we have one customer that we really care about, and then we just basically mine for problems that they have, and then we create products and services for that. Yeah. Now, I'll add to it, I think in an age of AI, if you do not go through this exercise, you're basically going to see the half-life time of your company really get shorter and shorter real fast, because pure utility is something that AI does very, very well. And so if you don't have the answer to that question, basically, who are you as a company, and not just answered by what you do, then I think you're going to have a real problem in the age of AI.
Well, I was gonna follow down your entrepreneurial journey, but I got to jump into AI based on what you just said. So, I started in engineering and technology, so I've been into AI for a while. Probably when it was called more machine learning. And as somebody who's just intellectually curious, I just would love prompting questions, and really becoming better at prompting. If I could look at my prompting from 5 or 6 years ago, and now it's like it's changed so much. But I look at it as you can almost surround yourself with really smart leadership team members. But like, let's say you state your problem, like, I'm trying to solve this problem. Through AI, you can have it find auxiliary problems. What are other problems for that same customer set? What are different ways to solve it? And I just know we've actually used it in leadership team strategic offsites and meetings, and it's just generated additional thoughts for us to think about, where you're brainstorming. I hate using that word, but that's what you're doing. And all of a sudden you brainstorm and you bring AI along with you in the meeting. And it's like having 5 more people in the meeting, not just one more. So just tell me a little bit about me, my customer, and AI. Tell me a little bit about the book.
I mean, like, maybe I can walk you a little bit into kind of how it came to be. So in about 2010, I was lucky enough to be part of a company that we sold to Facebook. And then I didn't really know what to do next. And I think there's this beautiful time that entrepreneurs has that I think of as the in-between time. but it's a vulnerable time because you have this whole identity that's linked to kind of this company that you're involved in, and now you're not linked to that anymore. And so everybody is kind of looking at you of like, what are you going to update on LinkedIn? And so I created this place called Pre-Hype, which was kind of like the reality was that it was kind of a halfway house for second-time founders that didn't know what to do next. But from the outside, it had a pretty website, and it looked like a kind of like a venture studio. Like we kind of said we build companies. But really, it was just a lot of us who just sat there and like, we don't really know what to do next. So therefore, like, let's just kind of sit in a cool warehouse in Chinatown. Now, over the years, we became obviously more and more interested in how do you build from scratch and what is really all the components that allow you to go from nothing to something in the most efficient manner. Because as an entrepreneur, your scarce resource is your time. And so you don't really want to spend endless amount of time working on something that doesn't work. And so we did this for 10, 15 years, and we're lucky enough to build a bunch of it. Now, AI rolled in 2020 for me. I got access to an early version of OpenAI's playground. And I was like, holy shit, the whole world's going to change again. And I got obsessed about how do you take this methodology that we developed over the years, and how do you atomize it and create autonomous agents that could do a lot of this work. Now, as part of all that, it dawned on me that entrepreneurship is going to change quite a lot. And so we started to write a book about what is all the components, what are all the elements that are going to change when AI suddenly will become this Iron Man suit for people who want to be entrepreneurs. And so the book has like basically 3 elements, and I babble off, so just interrupt me if you think it gets.
I actually grabbed my pen. I'm gonna take notes here.
So the first one is really that we believe that entrepreneurship will be increasingly democratized. 60% of Americans say they'd like to start something. Only about 9% go out to actually do it. And there's good reasons for it. You need a technology understanding, you need access to capital, you need time, you need all these different things. Now, the beauty is that if you just look at what has happened in the last 25 years of my career time, 30 years career, if we can think of new technology as entrepreneurial technologies, it's just really become much, much easier to actually do these things. Now, when I started my first company, I had to spend $5,000 buying a Windows NT server. You might be old enough to remember that, right? And actually connect it to the internet and have like a person who knew how to do that. And people who are starting companies now, you roll their eyes and go like, why don't you just use the cloud? And you're like, well, it wasn't around at that time. But then the cloud came around and made everything much easier with server infrastructure. And then the next class of companies had to build all this software. Now, when we did Bark, we were just one of the early ones that could use, I think we used something called Recurly, which was a billing subscription software. Now, I didn't have to understand how to write software. I just basically swiped my credit card, and SaaS software provided all these different things, right? And so that was the second step. I think the third step, which is we're just really entering, is this thing where there's literally nothing I can think of right now where I need capabilities that I can't ask ChatGPT or another foundational model to help me with. And that's everything from coming up with campaigns to designing video ads to making copy to scale my customer service interactions to whatever we can think of, making strategies. And so I really think we're getting to the point where there's not a lot of excuse for the 60% of people who say, hey, I have an idea, I have something I think I can do. I think I actually have the capabilities to actually understand how to run this business. I just don't know where to go. And so the first part of the book is very much about what are some of the elements that will allow us to see a new generation of, let's call them mom and pop stores that are maybe smaller. They're not supposed to be unicorns. There's somebody who understands a specific community, a specific tribe, if you like. And then what are the tools to help figure out what that tribe is that you want to serve? And then what are tools to help you figure out problems they have? And I'll mention one thing, and then I can make a pause to the 2 other points in the book. But we're looking at these 5 elements. We call the 5 Ps. These are really about what are your powers, what are your passions, what are your possessions, what are your positions, and what are your potentials. And those 5 things are elements in yourself that you can look into to figure out what might be a space, what might be an area where I might have something that's a little bit unique to me that will allow me to serve a customer type that is defined within one of these 5 Ps.
Okay. All right. So go ahead, jump into what go. So entrepreneurship is democratized, was point one. Go hit me with point two and three. I've got my notes here.
That's great. I mean, like the second part is really what is the type. The two and three kind of like intermingles a little bit, but like the third one is so the second one is what will happen when everybody can do everything. So what are the things that will make you stand out as an entrepreneur when literally everybody has access to ChatGPT and everybody will be able to ask it to do the same thing? And our thesis is in the age of AI, the only moat that will be left is what we call relationship capital. It is the customer founder fit. It is your ability to emotionally connect with a specific customer type. We look at it within three kind of like core areas. First one we call depth, or the intimacy layer, which is how much does a customer feel seen by you and why? The second thing is density, which is how much does a customer feel that you're part of the community that you have chosen to serve, or you maybe even become the platform for the community. And the third one is durability, or the resiliency layer, which is how much do you have the permission to offer another product or service than the initial one that people came and bought from you. And so within all those three components are this distinct kind of feeling thesis that we will need to go back as humans to figure out what makes us uniquely make us unique as a human to serve other unique human people. And so that's kind of the second layer of the book.
I like that. Well, let me kind of ping pong back to your entrepreneurial journey. You spent some time at MTV, which I remember when I saw that, I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So, like, tell me, was that foundational to building some of your creativity, or tell me a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. I mean, like, now, but these days I feel so happy that somebody remember what MTV was.
That when I'm old enough to remember when it first came out, it was a big.
It's a big deal. So I rolled into MTV in the late 90s when it was just becoming kind of like that thing, right? And so, and I think it's a good kind of like thing just to spend a few minutes on, because it was super important for how I see entrepreneurship. Now, first, I was an intern at MTV, but I knew a lot about the internet. And so this is like late 90s. This is just when it used to be like Fido and Veronica and Gopher. This is like just like Mosaic, the first browser ever, had come out like a few years before. And so it's just very early days. And my boss at the time basically said, hey, I hear you know about this internet. You should make a TV show about it. And I was an intern. I was like, sure. And so I came up with this idea and I pitched it, and everybody thought it was a complete stupid idea. And so they were like, this is never going to happen. And I was young and slightly more rebellious than I am now. So I was like, that is a good idea. And I do have a key count that gives me access to the studios. And so at 2 a.m, I took it upon myself to break into the studio and do an hour live TV show on the main MTV network. And luckily at the time, you didn't get sued. If enough people called in the next day and said, when can we see this show, that was really cool, then you got promoted. So I was basically like early 20s guy, didn't know much about anything. And the boss, the president of MTV, just called me and said, hey, dude, don't ever pull a stunt like that again, but I'm on the show on air. And so I became head of product development for MTV Viacom when I was 22. So now I'm 23. And got to spend a lot of years, 7-8 years, just really building up their computer games divisions and a lot of different things. And the reason why all that was important is for two reasons. One is MTV at the time was a bunch of weirdos. They were very young and they were just super empowered. And they had this little cube on the microphone. And because it had the MTV logo, they felt they could walk on water. And so everybody was just really allowed to do anything. And there was no rules, and everybody was making stuff up all along. And so it was like a crazy wild place, but mostly it was a place where people came in based on basically their agitation and their creativity and their ability to move stuff forward, not their CV.
Sure. Yep.
And it was incredible. The second thing I think they did very smart was they defined themselves as somebody who basically wanted to be the community layer of people who had music at heart. And so, yes, we had music TV channels, but we also had all these other TV shows that was really about being rock and roll, right? Like the Jackass of the shows. And so I really, when we did Bark, for example, I was like, I don't want to make like a brand that is just about the utility of having a dog. Like MTV was not about the utility of playing music. It's about the lifestyle of being obsessed about your dog. And so a lot of the stuff that we've done at Bark ever since is basically taking the MTV playbook for music and applying it onto dog. And I think what I've done for the teams that I've led is really try to replicate that very free, this very energetic place, the space where people will come in and do their best work and then hopefully have a great time while they were doing it.
No, I mean, just, it's interesting. You just brought me back to the late 90s and creativity. And I know at the time I had moved from Dallas out to Silicon Valley and started a company that was working with Cisco, and we were implementing the first voice over IP. And I remember going on sales calls and telling clients, you're going to be able to make phone calls over the internet. And you're like, nah, you can't do that. Because at the time we were all, using phones, calling internationally, and, you pay whatever, 50 cents a minute, 75 cents a minute. And it's just interesting to think of then. And I remember the building across from me, they hung a banner one day, and the banner was TiVo. And it was, and I remember walking over, and I got a demo TiVo box, which by the way, I loved for many years. I was probably one of their first and last customers. But it was a very interesting time, the late 90s, in terms of technology disruption based on what the internet was able to do in streaming and everything. So take me to BarkBox, because earlier you said one thing, and I circled it in my notes here, where you said focus on one customer. So, you focused on dogs. You didn't focus on cats. And I'm going to assume that that's because people love dogs more than cats. By the way, I have both. So maybe a bad assumption, but like, talk to me about how did you learn that lesson to focus on like one customer audience or set or persona, and to keep focused on that? Like, where did that come from?
I think in hindsight, we have all these interesting observations of why we did what we did at the time. But I think the reality was that Matt Carley and I just really liked hanging out together, and we really loved our dogs, and we wanted to make something that was fun. I mean, like at the time, we didn't really think that Bark would be that big of a business. We're like, we're just going to have a really good time building some cool stuff together. And so there was a innocence in the business that I think kind of almost made it successful. And the people that we hired, like at the time, nobody wanted to get hired by somebody who did like a stuff in a box dog business. Like this was not where the cool kids went to San Francisco and probably worked with you.
Yeah.
We got all the, so I think in many ways we saw it as kind of like this, movie Revenge of the Nerds, right? We were just like a bunch of crazy dog folks kind of hanging out together. And I think in many ways we were not serving a persona as much as we were just serving ourselves. We just wanted to make stuff that we really enjoyed doing. And so I think in hindsight, I realized that if you have to create focus groups and you have to spend endless amount of time studying your customers, and you often find them to be annoying, and you want to spend as little time with them as possible, then it's just very complicated to make a really good product for them. But if you love taking that call on a Sunday because people are going to start by sending a picture of their dog having a great time, then it's not too complicated to empathize with them. And empathy is obviously an incredible tool to do product development. And so in many ways, I mean, maybe it's just because I'm lazy and I hate focus groups, but like it's just like for me, like it's such a logic thing. I'm like, you built something for yourself, and then if there's a few of you, then there's probably 10,000 other. And the beauty of building stuff in the US is it's such a big homogeneous market where you have so many people that you can probably find like a 10,000, and by now with Bark, you can find millions, and it turned out wild, but it wasn't necessarily because there was a big strategy behind it when we started.
So let me ask you a leadership question. As you have developed over the last, 20, 25 years, you've probably seen the world change. You've seen, capital markets open, the internet make the world smaller, AI make people smarter. Is there any leadership belief you maybe had when you were at MTV, at 22, that now you're like, that's changed. I've matured my leadership style or some of my leadership beliefs. What would you say to that person that's 20 now and the person that's 50 now, and how you've grown? Is there anything in particular that you've seen change in how you've looked at the role of leadership?
It's such a fascinating question. I think maybe on the contrary, that I've kind of like, I think I went through my 20s being wild because I didn't know that there were rules, and MTV was not a place that reminded you that there were. And then I got into the real world for many years where everybody taught you about best practices and this is not how we do it. And, like everything was about trying to have this rapid regression to the mean. Like, what does Harvard Business Review tell you should do? And I think as I'm getting older, I'm unlearning that stuff in the middle. That yes, you can exploit, but explore is where the growth is. And I think in the age of AI and in a time with volatility, if you don't have an exploratory mindset, then you're going to have a really tough time. I think that, yes, you can make money just grinding it through, but it's so much work and it's so hard. And so if you don't find something that's a bit playful, it just requires too much energy. And so I'm almost like, I think, not that I had something I believed and then kind of like experienced me, taught me different. I think what I've learned was like the original way of thinking was the right one along the way. And I got basically polluted by the structures that we go through that no, I should do it in a different way. And I think as I'm getting older, I'm like, screw that. We should do this because it's fun. I'll give you a mental model for it. And I'm not sure if this is like way too philosophical for your audience, but I'll try and then she can cut out.
Sure.
I read a book a few years back by this guy called Kenneth Stanley. It's called Why Greatness Can't Be Planned. And it's a book about AI. It's about how we get to AGI. And he's an interesting researcher in AI, and he had like a very awesome career and built algorithms, sold them, and worked at all of the fancy places you can imagine. This book is kind of like a niche nerdy book. And his thesis is that the way that we get to AGI is not to try to figure out what it is and then amass the resources to get that. He makes the argument that any great invention is basically built on a system of open-endedness. You stumble into it. And the core kind of like thinking is that you should follow with great intensity basically what he defined as interestingness. And if you do that, then that will create stepping stones, and it might lead you somewhere that you had no idea that you would end up, but it's probably going to be a great place. And while this is about AI, I actually think increasingly this is my best articulated philosophy of entrepreneurship and how I like to work, that everybody always kind of like told me like, tell me your goal, and then you'll work towards it. And it just never worked out that way. And now I'm a little bit more, I basically want to hang with people I find to be incredible, and I want to work on stuff that I think is just really interesting and that I care about. Not because it's the thing that everybody should care about, it's just I care about. And when I combine those two, sometimes I'm really lucky and a big business kind of turns out of it. And every time I try to be like very laser focused and like build something, and that's a big market, it has a big TAM and like all these mechanical thing, I end up somewhere that I don't enjoy being very much. And honestly, often it doesn't become very successful either.
So I think my takeaway from that was, I think it was the third or fourth word you said, where you said explore. You used that word, in your 20s, you explored because there weren't rules. You were willing to try and fail. One of my things that I try to talk about leadership is, having the courage to fail and the faith to succeed. And I think, there's two types of people. The people as they get older actually have less courage to fail. And then there's people that have failed along the way, and as they get older, they have more courage to fail because they realize, you skinned your knee. So what? You got up, you were fine. A project didn't work. You didn't get fired. So then you're willing to take that next courageous step. But I think another point that you made was in the middle of your career, when you maybe are getting told more about KPIs and best practices and PMOs and that starts to become a little bit of the daily lingo, is to not lose that exploration that you maybe had when you were a little bit younger, maybe even a little bit more naive. And I think sometimes
100%.
there's good to that.
I mean, a bunch of the products that I was lucky. I grew up with a very entrepreneurial mom who basically is untethered to reality. And so everything was just always possible. Yeah, you're just going to do that, just do that. And I think I basically took that. And so, yeah, I would very much agree with you. I think the failure is such a difficult thing because it's obviously easy to say, but it's just so difficult to actually do when you sit there and you have, families to feed and a family to feed and stuff like that. I do think that you can hack it by making, for example, failure cheaper. Like you can just make attempts that doesn't cost a lot of stuff. If you do your job and you do what you get paid for, and then you do something a little bit extra, your boss not gonna fire you. Are they gonna go you should just spend your time? And they go well, I also did what you told me, so we're probably fine, right? And so I do think that there's specifically with technology now, a lot of people will have the ability of really channeling their inner entrepreneurial, inner explorer. Now I think the difficult part is that then we have to figure out how to do that. And it's easier to say, oh, I'm not allowed to, than it is to actually come up with something and then push it forward. And so I think it's going to be a taxing period of time for us all, where literally we're faced with the issue that you can now literally do anything.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out, are you willing to do that? Are you the type that will do that? But also you have to figure out what do I actually want to do?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'll tell you a 30-second AI story, and then I'll let you think about this as we wrap up. Question that you can be thinking about is, what advice would you give to that leader that isn't focused on AI or isn't getting on the AI train? But let me tell you an AI story. So I have 2 pugs. I've had pugs every day of my life, and one of them all of a sudden is having a difficult time in the middle of the night. It's like midnight, 1 or 2. I actually wrote an article about it. And, I call the doctor, the vet, they have an emergency number. I call the emergency number and I talk to a lady and, I tell her what's going on and I don't really get anywhere. She said they have a dog in emergency surgery. Could I wait till the morning, or here's another number. So I wound up calling 3 places. And they all said, hey, we can't take you right now, but, let's see if we can make it through the night. Meanwhile, my wife goes with the dog in the other room and talks to Claude AI and basically says everything that I do. She comes in, she says, here's what I think's going on. And, we can go in the morning. She literally, she printed it out. She went to our regular vet, 8 in the morning. They came in a little early for her. We left a voicemail and they go, that was exactly what was going on with your dog. Now, AI couldn't treat our dog. We had to, get x-rays and various things, but just what a great application where I was kind of hitting, let's call it receptionists, that weren't able to really give me vet tech advice. And, my wife, hit Claude. And I remember just that night sitting there going, there's so many incredible applications for AI, and I kind of said, although each of those vets that I called, they should really have AI plugged into their phones so that when somebody calls in and says, hey, I've got an emergency. Hey, I got these 3 symptoms. The person can say, hey, I'm not a certified vet tech. They can do the legal disclaimer and then say, but here's what could be happening. And, but I just thought that was a interesting AI dog story and how, AI made us feel more comfortable than 3 human beings actually at 24-hour vet emergency clinics.
I think we have to kind of look at this new technology and then I guess get to terms with either it is like crypto that everybody talked about that nobody really started to use ever, or it's like an internet that everybody started to use, but it took 10, 15 years, or it's like electricity that once it kind of came around, it changed everything, right? It wasn't that it didn't kind of just make horses go faster. It kind of it meant that we created factories, then we could work at night, and that we could suddenly have companies being a physical place that was far from where the product had to be distributed because you had the telegraph to communicate and stuff like that. I believe it's like electricity. I think it's fundamentally going to change everything. And I think this example is something that is wild, considering that the technology is really only a few years old. And so I think we are all having the experience that you're having now on different levels. And I think over the next few years, we'll just really have to kind of figure out. And I think as leaders, we'll have to figure out, how do we balance, the fear mongering of people losing their jobs, of our companies becoming less relevant. But I think we have choices. And I think, yes, it's easier to see the doom and gloom. But let's take entrepreneurship, for example. I think it's going to be a golden time for entrepreneurs. I think the US is built on mom and pop stores. We're very proud of basically these small time entrepreneurs that we have. We've forgotten to praise them. But I think that everybody now have the ability to do that. Find a customer they'd like to serve, and then find a problem that they have, and then build an agentic stack on top of these technologies that allow them to serve them and scale that into something that they can make money on. And that is incredible. And it is something that, if you are curious and you want to be an explorer, like, this is just going to be like an incredible time. And I am definitely one for kind of like grabbing that and just running with it as fast as I can.
No, I love that. And, Henrik, for our audience, if they want to follow you, get to know more about you, if they want to get your book, can you tell us how they can follow you, stay in touch with you and such?
Appreciate it. I mean, like, the book is available on Amazon and all kind of like available bookstores. Called Me, My Customer, and I, and it's an easy read. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so if people want to connect, just connect me with there. I'm happy to answer questions there. I read everything that I get there. And there I have like the newsletters and all. Oh yeah, and then I have a podcast about AI called Beyond the Prompt with a Stanford professor called Henrik Werdelin. So people who are interested in how do you apply AI to your business, they can go and check that out.
All right, and I'll also say you have your own website. I know that so another avenue. But I just want to thank you for today, and to our audience, the legendary founder of Bark. So if you're a dog lover, you know what that means. Has been an entrepreneur for nearly 20 years, has a great AI platform. But I think some of our takeaways today are, going back to some of his MTV days of being willing to explore, not losing that creativity, that exploration, but then leveraging AI to exploit some of that creativity and some of that exploration, where, you can use AI as a co-leadership team member, a co-founder, almost like another team member, to make you smarter, your team smarter, and have you focus in on what that customer really needs. So, Henrik, thank you for joining us today. I think your lessons are extremely valuable. I know I'm going to be getting your book on Amazon and tuning into your podcast. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
This has been The Fearless Experience with Brendan P. Keegan. If you want to learn to live and lead fearlessly, go to brendanpkeegan.com.